The silence in the public hospital's emergency room was broken only by the monotonous beeping of heart monitors and the squeak of slippers on the polished floor. Maria clutched a yellowed envelope in her trembling hands, her fingers nervously tracing the worn edges of the paper she'd kept for 15 years. At 62, she maintained an upright posture despite the weariness that weighed on her stooped shoulders, the result of decades spent as a commercial building cleaner. Her hands, marked by calluses and small scars from cleaning products, contrasted sharply with the gentleness with which she held the document, her only proof that she had once been more than just a shadow in life's hallways. That Monday morning, Maria had arrived at the hospital accompanying Mrs. Eleanor, her 80-year-old neighbor who had collapsed in her backyard while watering her plants. What should have been a quick visit had turned into hours of waiting, and now Maria watched, with growing discomfort, the way the staff treated the elderly woman. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and impeccable nails, looked at Mrs. Eleanor as if she were an impediment to her morning routine. When the elderly woman tried to explain her symptoms in the simple language of someone who had only studied until the 4th grade, the receptionist sighed loudly, typed forcefully on the keyboard, and rolled her eyes so everyone could see. Maria felt her chest tighten with each display of impatience. She knew that look well, the same one she received when she needed to ask for information in places where her simple clothes and humble way of speaking marked her as someone of lesser importance. Mrs. Eleanor, sensing the hostility, began to shrink in her plastic chair, her wrinkled hands trembling as she tried to find the right words to avoid causing further inconvenience. With each question from the receptionist, delivered in a harsh and impatient tone, the elderly woman diminished a little more, like a flower wilting under the scorching sun of disdain. Around the waiting room, other people watched the scene in silence. A man in a suit, who clearly came for a private appointment, checked his watch frequently and shook his head in disapproval, not at the receptionist's rudeness, but at the delay caused by the confused old woman. A young mother with a baby in her arms whispered something in her husband's ear, and they both giggled quietly, looking in Mrs. Eleanor's direction. Even the security guard, a young man who couldn't be more than 25, seemed torn between the duty of maintaining order and the embarrassment of witnessing such a lack of humanity. Maria squeezed the envelope even tighter. She remembered her own mother who had died at 71 in a similar hospital after being treated like a number, like a problem to be solved quickly to make way for the next patient. She remembered how powerless she had felt that day, too young to have the courage to confront the indifference, too poor to believe that her voice mattered. But now, watching Mrs. Eleanor shrink further into the chair, something inside her began to boil, not anger, but a serene determination that came from a deep place, where she kept all the silent injustices she had witnessed throughout her life. The situation worsened when Mrs. Eleanor, trying to be helpful, offered to fill out the registration form herself. Her hands trembled so much that she could barely hold the pen, and when she began to write with the shaky handwriting of someone who learned to read and write as an adult, the receptionist let out a theatrical sigh that echoed through the room. "Let me do this faster," she said, snatching the paper from the elderly woman's hands with a brusque gesture that made Mrs. Eleanor jump in surprise. "You take too long and you write everything wrong." It was at that moment that Maria stood up, not abruptly or dramatically, but with the calm of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. She walked to the counter, her footsteps silent on the cold hospital floor. The receptionist didn't even look up as she approached, focused on quickly filling out Mrs. Eleanor's form with impatient movements. Maria remained there, standing, simply waiting. Her presence was like a shadow that slowly lengthens, impossible to ignore for long. When the receptionist finally looked up, Maria met her gaze with a serenity that disconcerted the young woman. There was no anger in her eyes, no accusation. There was something deeper and more disturbing, an infinite sadness mixed with an understanding that seemed to transcend not only that moment but all of human existence. Maria slowly opened the yellowed envelope and took out a university diploma, carefully preserved despite the year. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, but the words were still perfectly legible: Maria Santos Silva, Bachelor of Psychology. The receptionist blinked several times, as if unable to process what she saw. Maria placed the diploma on the counter, smoothing it gently with her calloused hands. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low but carried an authority that came from decades of experience and suffering. "I graduated 15 years ago. I worked for 7 years serving people in situations of social vulnerability, people like Mrs. Eleanor, like my mother, like myself at many times in my life. The entire room had fallen silent, even the baby in the young mother's arms had stopped whimpering. Maria continued, her voice maintaining the same serene tone. I lost my job when the community clinic where I worked closed due to lack of funding. Since then, I've worked as a cleaner to support my family. I clean offices at night, I care for the elderly on weekends, I clean houses during the day. But that hasn't made me forget that each person who comes through here carries a story, carries pain, carries hope. Scene end. The receptionist had gone pale, her hands stilled on the keyboard, her gaze flitting between the diploma and Maria's serene face. Miss Eleanor, watching with wide eyes, gripped Maria's hand with a strength surprising for her age. The man in the suit tucked his phone into his pocket and sat up straighter. The young mother hugged her baby tighter, as if suddenly understanding something fundamental about life's fragility. Maria took back the diploma and carefully placed it back in the envelope. Mrs. Eleanor raised 5 children alone after she was widowed. She worked as a housekeeper her whole life to educate them. Today, one is a teacher, another a nurse, and one is an accountant. She taught her neighbors to read and write on weekends for 40 years without charge. She taught community children to read and write at her own kitchen table. Maria paused, letting the words settle in the thick air of the waiting room. She deserves to be treated not only with politeness, but with the reverence we give to those who built the world we live in. The transformation in the atmosphere was almost physical. The receptionist stood up, and for the first time since Maria arrived, looked directly at Mrs. Eleanor. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice completely different, imbued with genuine humility. "Please let me start over. How may I help you today?" Mrs. Eleanor smiled, a small smile, but one that lit up her entire face. "Thank you, my dear, you're very kind." And here, at this moment when we witness the transformation a single person can effect on an entire environment, allow me to pause for something important. If you're here, listening to this story, it's because you believe, as I do, that small gestures can change the world. It's because you understand that every story of restored dignity, every moment of reclaimed humanity, deserves to be shared. So if this narrative touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell. Here, we share real stories of people like Maria, like Mrs. Eleanor, like each of us in our most vulnerable and most heroic moments. Your subscription isn't just a click, it's your vote of confidence that stories of humanity matter, that it's worth taking the time to reflect on our capacity to transform the world around us. Together, we create a community where every person is seen, heard, and valued. Subscribe now, because stories like this need to be told, and you are a part of it. What happened next surprised even Maria. The man in the suit stood up and walked over to Mrs. Eleanor. "Ma'am, if you'll allow me, I'm a doctor at this hospital. May I escort you to the examination room?" He spoke with a gentleness that completely contrasted with his previous impatience. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him in surprise, then at Maria, as if asking if this was real. "It would be an honor," she replied, her voice gaining strength with each word. The young mother also approached. "I'm a nurse here," she said, adjusting the baby in her arms. "I was off today, I just came for a quick checkup for my son. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to be present during your appointment. Sometimes it's good to have a nurse nearby to clarify any questions." Mrs. Eleanor nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "You're angels," she murmured. Even the security guard joined the group. "Ma'am, I can help you with a wheelchair if you need it. My grandmother is your age, and I know how important it is to feel safe in a new place." Maria watched everything with a discreet smile, seeing how a single act of courage, the simple act of showing who she really was, had unleashed a current of humanity that completely transformed the environment. But perhaps the most touching moment was when the receptionist rose from her desk and walked over to where Maria was standing. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Miss Maria," she said, using the title with genuine respect, I didn't know. I mean, I never thought about." about who the people are that come through here every day. She paused, struggling to find the right words. My mother was also a cleaner. She cleaned offices at night when I was little. Sometimes I would go with her and sleep on the reception sofa while she worked. I shouldn't have forgotten that. I shouldn't have forgotten where I come from. Maria gently held the young woman's arm. You didn't forget, dear. You just got lost for a moment. It happens to all of us. The important thing is that we find our way back home, and our home is our humanity. The receptionist nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. May I ask your full name? I would like to know how to address you properly. Maria Santos Silva, but you can just call me Maria. We are all sisters on this journey. While Miss Eleanor was treated with all the care and attention she deserved, Maria remained in the waiting room. Other patients had arrived, and she noticed how the atmosphere had completely changed. The receptionist greeted each person with genuine interest, asking how she could help, offering water, patiently explaining the procedures. The security guard assisted elderly people with their canes and wheelchairs. An atmosphere of respect and care had taken the place of indifference and haste. An elderly woman arrived with difficulty walking, leaning on a makeshift cane. Immediately, 3 people stood up to offer help. A young man gave up his more comfortable chair. The receptionist rose from her desk to escort the woman to the counter, asking if she would like to sit while they filled out the paperwork together. Maria watched everything with a warm heart, understanding that she had witnessed something rare and precious, the moment when the dormant humanity in each person awakens and transforms not only an environment, but possibly entire lives. When Miss Eleanor returned from the doctor's office, her face radiated relief and gratitude. The doctor walked her back to Maria, explaining that it wasn't anything serious, just a bit of high blood pressure caused by stress and the heat. He prescribed some simple medication and recommended rest. But the most important thing, he said, looking directly at Maria, is that she continues to be cared for by people who love her. That's worth more than any medicine. As they walked out of the hospital, Mrs. Eleanor held Maria's arm tightly. My dear, she said, what you did in there, you restored my dignity. I was already feeling like a burden, like someone worthless. You reminded me of who I am. Maria smiled, gently squeezing the elderly woman's hand. Mrs. Eleanor, you never lost your dignity. Sometimes people just need to be reminded how to see. As they left the hospital, something extraordinary happened. The receptionist ran after them, holding a small plant in a plastic pot. Mrs. Eleanor, she said, slightly breathless, I remembered you said you liked plants. This one was dying on the administrative desk. Nobody was taking care of it. I thought maybe you could save it. Mrs. Eleanor received the plant as if it were the most precious gift in the world. It just needed some love, she said, gently stroking the wilted leaves. Just like all of us. That late afternoon, as the sun set behind the city buildings, Maria and Mrs. Eleanor walked slowly down the sidewalk. Mrs. Eleanor carried the plant in her lap like a baby, talking about how she would care for it, where she would place it in the window to get sun, how she would water it every day. Maria watched her friend's transformation, from a hunched and diminished woman that morning, to a woman walking tall, speaking enthusiastically about giving life to something that was dying. Maria, Mrs. Eleanor said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk, you kept that diploma all these years. Why? Maria looked at the envelope in her hands, pondering the question. I think I kept it because it doesn't just represent my education, it represents a period of my life when I believed I could make a difference in the world. When I lost my job, I thought I had lost that ability too. Today I discovered I was wrong. We don't need a title or a position to touch people's hearts. We just need the courage to show who we really are. They stopped in front of Mrs. Eleanor's house, a simple but well-kept building with a small garden in front where other plants seemed to await the arrival of their new companion. Would you like to come in for coffee? The elderly woman asked. Maria smiled but shook her head. Thank you, but I need to go home. I have to prepare dinner for my grandchildren. But tomorrow, if you like, I can come and help you replant that little plant in a bigger pot. Mrs. Eleanor's eyes lit up. That would be wonderful. And Maria, thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to bloom again. As she walked home, Maria thought about everything that had happened that day. She remembered the receptionist's face when she saw the diploma, the instant transformation in her demeanor, the wave of humanity that spread through the waiting room like ripples in a calm lake. She thought about how a single gesture of authenticity had restored the dignity not only of Mrs. Eleanor, but of everyone present, including herself. Arriving home, Maria was greeted by the joyful shouts of her two grandchildren, 8 and 10 years old, who had been living with her since her son had become unemployed. While preparing dinner, she told them about her day, adapting the story to their age. You know, she said, stirring the beans on the stove, sometimes people forget that we all have an important story. We were all children. We all have dreams. We all feel pain and joy. The important thing is to remember this when we look at others. Her older grandson, always curious, asked Grandma, "Why don't you go back to working as a psychologist?" Maria smiled, serving dinner on mismatched but clean plates. "Dear, I never stopped being a psychologist. I take care of people's minds and hearts every day, in every job I do, in every person I meet. It's not the place where we work that defines who we are. It's how we treat the people around us." That night, after the children were asleep, Maria sat on her small porch with a cup of tea. She took the diploma out of the envelope once more and looked at it in the light of the street lamp. For 15 years, that paper had been her anchor, her proof that she had once been someone important. Today, she had discovered that she had always been important, not because of the diploma, but because of who she chose to be every day, in every encounter, in every opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. She thought of the receptionist, probably at home at that moment, perhaps calling her cleaner mother to tell her she loved her. She thought of the doctor, who had discovered that his true vocation lay not only in medicine, but in the humanity with which he practiced it. She thought of the nurse, who learned that care has no hours or uniform. She thought of the security guard, who understood that protecting people goes far beyond maintaining physical order. And she thought of Miss Eleanor, probably watering her new little plant at that very moment, whispering words of encouragement to the wilted leaves, believing that with patience and love, anything can bloom again. That was the deepest lesson of that day. We are all like that plant. Sometimes we wilt under the weight of indifference, disrespect, the feeling that we don't matter. But all it takes is one person to look at us with genuine interest, with genuine humanity, for us to begin to bloom again. Maria tucked the diploma back into its envelope, but this time she didn't keep it as a memento of the past. She kept it as a reminder of the present, that each day offers endless opportunities to use our knowledge, our experience, our humanity to touch someone's life. It doesn't matter if we're cleaning an office, assisting in a hospital, teaching at a school, or simply walking down the street. There's always someone who needs to be seen, heard, respected, reminded of their own dignity. The next morning, Maria woke to the birdsong and the aroma of coffee that had become automatic in her routine. But something had changed. She wasn't just Maria, the cleaner. She wasn't just Maria, the former psychologist. She was Maria Santos Silva, a woman who carried in her calloused hands the power to transform environments and touch hearts. She was someone who had discovered that heroism doesn't need a uniform, that leadership doesn't need a title, that change doesn't need permission. As she prepared for another day of work, Maria looked in the mirror and saw not just a 62-year-old woman with graying hair and work-worn hands. She saw a silent warrior, a guardian of human dignity, a teacher of humanity, who uses life as a classroom, and each encounter as an opportunity to leave the world a little better than she found it. And so, at this moment where the story ends but life continues, we remember that each of us carries within ourselves the power to be someone's Maria, the power to see beyond appearances, to honor the story each person carries, to restore dignity with a simple gesture of authenticity and respect. Because in the end, we discover that it's not the grand achievements that change the world, but the small acts of humanity that, like seeds planted in fertile soil, bloom into gardens of hope where we least expect to find them. Y así, en este momento en que la historia termina pero la vida continúa, recordemos que cada uno de nosotros lleva en sí el poder de ser la María de alguien, el poder de ver más allá de las apariencias, de honrar la historia que cada persona lleva, de restaurar la dignidad con un simple gesto de autenticidad y respeto. Porque al final descubrimos que no son las grandes hazañas las que transforman el mundo, sino los pequeños actos de humanidad que, como semillas plantadas en tierra fértil, florecen en jardines de esperanza donde menos lo esperamos.